Welcome to Liturgical Shenanigans, a Wayfolk Arts podcast, with your hosts, Hannah,
Phil,
Jackson,
and Maddie.
Hello, friends. Happy Eastertide.
Happy
Eastertide.
What's
As in
Eastertide?
tide, like tide pools?
Well, no, tide as in like time, the tides of time. I don't know.
Eddie's in the space.
It could have something to do with tides because
possible.
doesn't Easter have to do with the moon calendar and the moon influences the tides?
That's really
That's
good.
true.
Maybe.
Yeah.
I'm smart.
We don't
know.
I love that answer. I have literally no idea. But I love that answer. But this is the season immediately post Easter. And our podcast rhythm got a little bit funky, and we really wanted to share some Holy Week thoughts and stories with you, but our release date comes right after Easter. So you're getting Holy Week from us
In the midst.
Yes, in the midst of Eastertide rather than Holy Week.
That's great about
But
that.
we are in Holy Week right now.
That's true.
So
The
As
four
we're
of us-
recording, yeah.
Yes, as we're
Yes.
recording. Little time whammy.
But what's cool about that is in the right now of the listener, they just experienced Holy Week, whatever that means for them. And so as we're sharing stories, I'm sure we probably are going to ask you to share your stories with us. So you can be listening and see what these stories bring up in you.
Perfect.
But, we should probably share what Holy Week is, because I will say before, even I've worked at two different churches, and my understanding of what Holy Week is changed depending on what the church I worked at
Emphasized?
thank you, in their particular context.
Same
Yeah.
one.
I didn't know certain Holy Week days existed.
Fair.
Yeah. I think this year was the first year that I fully knew that every day of Holy Week has events tied
Oh,
to
see?
it.
Didn't know that.
Yeah.
Still didn't know that. So a too long don't read version of what Holy Week is the week it starts with Palm Sunday, which is the Sunday before Easter, and ends with Easter, which is the Sunday after Palm Sunday. That's it.
There you go.
Perfect.
But if you really want to buckle in and hear the full thing, someone else will start.
I don't know. Jackson, do you have anything to say about Holy Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday?
I mean, I can do a short version of it. Basically, each of the days of Holy Week have a synoptic story or three associated with them. And a synoptic story is Matthew, Mark, or Luke. So stories from one of those gospels around Jesus's kind of last days in Jerusalem up until the crucifixion. So
Not John, because John is crazy.
because John is awesome. And
Tells different stories than
On
Matthew, Mark,
another
and
level.
Luke. Okay, but they're different stories a little bit than the other three.
it's true. It's true. You had a different perspective.
There's a lot of talking leading up to the arrest
There
in
is.
John. Chapters and
Yes.
chapters.
Yes, that's true. Jesus
That's
goes
the
on
other
a
too long
giant
don't read.
monologue.
Big monologue.
Giant monologue in John. Anyway, Jackson, tell us about. Okay, so that was Monday, Tuesday.
Yeah, so
Wednesday.
there's definitely stories. Like for instance, Monday has the overturning of the tables and people questioning Jesus' authority associated with it. But the kind of if you're not going to observe all the days of Holy Week, you've likely observed a couple of the other ones later in the week, especially
And at the beginning of the week. You've probably done Palm Sunday.
Palm Sunday. That's true. So you hit Palm Sunday.
Which on Palm Sunday we typically tell the story of Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, which begins his final days.
And if you remember and listen to our Ash Wednesday episode, we talked about how the ashes that are impositioned
Imposed.
upon you, that happened to you, are often burned from the palm leaves of the palm branches used in Palm Sunday worship services.
Then perhaps you take a couple day jump and maybe you've observed a Maundy Thursday.
Or maybe in your context, it's called a tambourine.
Tenebrae.
Thanks.
Yep.
Well, that'd be the kind of service you do on a Maundy Thursday. Yeah? Tenebrae service, the service of the dimming of the lights.
Yep. Yep.
But also, well, I guess I'm what? I jumped in. Because a lot of churches will call Palm Sunday Passion Sunday. And it's usually, not always, but usually churches that maybe don't have those other, skipping ahead, but like those other services that are about arrest and crucifixion and such will do that so that there's a cliffhanger Sunday morning for next Sunday.
Right.
That sounds bad. But yeah, Passion Sunday is another term I've heard.
Right.
Maundy Thursday is also the day when like sometimes communion is had. Like it's remembering the moment that Jesus had his final moments with his disciples, final meal, washing of feet. Yeah, washing of feet
It's
is
the
often
gross
thing.
service. Another service that I will not be a participant in, other than I will be a happy viewer. No one is touching my feet.
Yeah,
Fair.
I have a rough time with foot washing services too. Yeah.
That's what Peter said, though.
Peter and I.
Yep. Buds.
But then also
Chicken crows.
Seder's. Christian Seder's often happen on Maundy Thursday.
Yep.
Which is what, Phil?
Yeah, what on earth is that?
Right? Is it a thing is the question, right? So the Seder is the the Jewish observance of Passover, which happens over a course of a meal, and there's some beautiful, beautiful liturgy tied up in family discussions and pieces of food representing pieces of the story, and it's amazing. And a lot of Christians, hopefully from a place of honoring the tradition and not just saying, but we have the whole story and they don't, will do versions of Passover to remember that story as well in the midst of Holy Week, since that's the meal that Jesus was having, was eager to have the Passover meal with his friends.
That we remember on communion Sundays.
That we remember every time we have communion.
Yeah.
And
If you've got a really thoughtful congregation, they have probably hired a rabbi to come in and lead that Seder meal.
And then Friday.
Then we'll jump to Friday. Friday, of course, is often called Good Friday. That's the service where you often do, if you haven't done the cliffhanger on Sunday, you're doing the cliffhanger on a Good Friday service. It's often associated with readings, basically from Passover night through to the crucifixion. Oftentimes the service, almost always, the service will end with either the crucifixion or the tomb. And then so that's often associated with sometimes crosses, all the times crosses, but oftentimes cross imagery and things like that.
A lot of times darkness. If there's a church day of the year when we're going to leave the church in silence,
Yes.
it's often that one.
You often leave in
If we're going to
silence.
nail something to a cross made out of wood.
Oh, interesting, because I've done that on Ash Wednesday.
Oh, interesting.
Ooh.
Yeah. Oh, okay. So yeah, different traditions. I was going to say it's like a funeral service.
Yeah.
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 Funeral vibes. I guess it is kind of a funeral service.
Yeah.
Yep. Saturday is a weird one.
Holy Saturday.
Holy Saturday. We'll talk a little bit, I think, on the podcast today about some ways to engage Saturday. But also so there's a couple things that maybe you've jumped in terms of observing on Saturday. The harrowing of hell happens on Saturday in some traditions, which is like a day where Jesus is like battling in hell.
Lots of cool artwork.
Lots of cool
I wish
artwork.
I
from that
witnessed.
story.
I didn't know that was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
People engaged. I need a harrowing of hell service.
I know.
It's that one fun line. He descended to the dead.
Yep.
There we go. What's that mean?
What happened?
Does it mean?
Yes.
The gates of hell are overturned.
Also, you may have observed some sort of rest or Sabbath or something because that is, in the Synoptics, what is observed on the Saturday between Good Friday and Easter Sunday.
It gets a verse.
It gets a verse.
And on the Sabbath they rested.
Yep.
Early in the morning, before the sun had
Ew.
risen.
I just got chills. I hate that just happened. Anyways.
Emotions.
And then, of course, you have Easter.
Yeah.
Christ is risen.
As is
He is
the bunny.
risen indeed.
Indeed. Almost.
I said as is the bunny.
So there you go. There's the brief, not so brief
Yep.
summation of Holy Week.
Now you are prepared
So similar to our Christmas episode, it's just, and similar to our Ash Wednesday episode, this is just going to be slightly different. Instead of us engaging a liturgy of Holy Week, we're going to talk about how we've all experienced Holy Week in meaningful ways, perhaps in frustrating ways, just what Holy Week means to us. And we look forward to hearing what Holy Week means to you. So yes, I can start us off.
Perfect.
Oftentimes congregations or worshiping folks will do something called Stations of the Cross. Stations of the Cross, usually, so if you experience something different, I'd love to hear about it. But usually what they are is a way to actually participate in those parts of the story that Holy Week tells. So starting with sometimes Jesus's triumphant entry into Jerusalem, but it takes you through like Jesus's final moments to his death. You don't usually talk about Easter at Stations of the Cross. So sometimes there'll be a station that like you might participate in some kind of communion, something to remember his final meal. They usually have like a participatory element. So when I've done them, I've tried to make them highly sensory based because I usually do them I have done them for children and families. And children often, especially if they can't yet read the story, a good way to engage the story is through their senses. But even as adults,
Yes.
as people who can read, if we're literate adults, engaging through the senses is a meaningful experience. So I've always loved Stations of the Cross. I like to see what other spaces do. I like to write Stations of the Cross. I have caused problems and conflict with Stations of the Cross because, like I said, sometimes there'll be, I'm using communion element, but this is a hill I will die on. So if I engaged in this conflict with you in a worshiping body, welcome back to the conflict. It's not communion, but in Jesus's last meal, he took the cup and said drink, and he took the bread and said eat. And so you cannot tell that story without using those words because that is what's in scripture. What would be the common sense thing to do sensory-wise is drink some juice and eat some bread.
Right.
Have never had this questioned anytime I've done this in Stations of the Cross. Even at this particular place that one year decided to question it. And they said, no, you need permission from Session, which is like our church government body, to do this. And I thought, okay, cool, whatever, give me permission. They denied me permission.
Oh, wow.
So I had to use lemons.
What?
Yep. And I think I did a prayer box of some kind for the second part. Don't ask me how I tied it in. I don't remember. Literally the same scripture, same words, but the elements are what made it.
And a prayer box.
Not communion. So,
Interesting.
yeah.
Yep. Cool.
Phil's
That's
laughing
gonna
at
be-
me.
I'm not. There's no way that we have time to engage
I
a
know.
conversation around communion right now. And
Well,
I have,
yeah,
we all
especially
know by now
because
I have
it's
so
gonna
much to
come
say.
back in when I tell my story
Yeah.
at the end too.
oh, mine too. Mine has communion in it too.
Well, then maybe we need to tee it up right now.
no, just there's so much there.
It goes back to, was it in a, I have said before about how sometimes I feel like we gatekeep communion a little bit. And this feels like a very good example of, are you serious? We can only engage this part of the story if it's permission granted and in a very specific, like, it has to be on a Sunday morning. These particular people have to be present.
Right.
And I think what was most frustrating for me about this was I wasn't part of whatever conversation the session had to talk about why it was a no. It was just a no. And I was told that they had this like beautiful, enriching theological conversation about why they were saying no. And they all like decided that was the moment everyone was going to define what communion even meant to every person. And I was sitting here going, that's nice. How am I meant to tell the story well and not do... You've just told me that bread and juice now also only count if they're truly communion. Like anytime I have bread and juice, it's communion. Nobody was speaking the words of institution.
Exactly,
they were reading the scripture of the story separate from each other. They were separate stations. And and doing literally what the scripture commands them to do.
Yeah.
So it's just, I am sweating thinking about this moment. But yeah, so I still have feelings about that theological choice, I guess. But either way, we still engaged the stations through senses. Lemons.
You could have just made grape jelly sandwiches.
Don't even get me started. That would have been very sassy of me.
Yes. I mean, you know.
And I also, just so everyone knows, to add to the disappointment, I'm not sure if other people's worshiping bodies have this but just this experience. Stations of the Cross, because it's sometimes an extra thing people have to go to, they are sometimes not very well attended.
Yeah.
So the people that said no, none of them even attended
Right.
the stations of the cross. So just a whole other extra element of whatever.
So at the Seder, one of the things that you get is like the bitter herb. Mm-hmm. And that feels like it would fit right now.
With the lemons?
We want to taste the bitterness of them not coming. I think we need a post Stations of the Cross Seder.
But I really loved doing these at youth group with my youth because it meant, one, they all engaged it. But then we also got to have post stations reflections. And it's always been interesting to me to learn what stations and what elements that they got to take home were actually meaningful, because sometimes I go, this ends up in the trash. But I have students who, like, years after would say, oh, I still have my cotton ball soaked perfume thing in a bag under my bed.
It still smells like it.
Still probably smells like that nasty, cheap Walgreens vanilla stuff. Yeah. But
You didn't shell out for nard?
no, and I've smelled nard. No. And the whole sanctuary smells like that whatever perfume you purchased for weeks.
Yep.
Spilled on the
Yeah.
carpet.
Like an Abercrombie and Fitch store.
Axe. Use Axe.
Yep. Puts a new meaning to that story.
Right.
So anyway, Stations of the Cross.
So my story that I'll share just a little bit about is a Good Friday observance. My church and my whole like little town observe Good Friday by engaging in a crosswalk. And I'm sure that there is a critique of crosswalks out there, but today I'm going to speak in appreciation of it. But it was a really meaningful observance because it was a public one for sure. We would walk kind of a route from one church to another in the community. And I think that's where I'll start. It was an ecumenical service. It was across like almost all the churches of the town. All kind of got together, and we would walk with a cross in a group of people to each other's churches and pray at each other's churches. And then arrive at whoever's church it was the turn that year to host the service and have a Good Friday service together. So like, 5 or 7 churches.
So cool.
Yeah, all of them just kind of said for this day, I come from a small Minnesota town. It's up north. So for this one day, we're just all gonna do this service together. And it was hard sometimes because again, I'm from northern Minnesota and it's very cold up there in
Even
March
now,
or April.
Like so many people right now in Minnesota, in Jackson's hometown, still have feet of snow.
Yep.
And it is actively snowing right now.
Yep.
So cold.
So yeah, it's a cold walk sometimes, and I live in a town, or I used to live in a town that was on a hill, so we had a hill that we would often call Golgotha. Yeah. And then whoever is like carrying the cross at that specific moment was like, good luck.
Oh man, how big was the cross?
It was a significant cross. It wasn't like quite life size, but it was big. Like the cross brace would be probably a little taller than I am right now. So like maybe like between 6 and 7 feet is where the cross beam would hit.
Wow.
So and like 4x8 or 4x4 kind of square bit of timber that made it. So so yeah, it was a heavy cross. But I think the thing that I appreciated about it the most was the kind of definitely the ecumenical and kind of community feel that was generated around it, and the sense that you were part of a broader community of faith that disagreed with each other throughout the year and yet also agreed on some of the really important things. And so that was a really impactful thing. The other part that I just wanted to celebrate was the the physicality of that ritual, especially coming from a pietistic background. Kind of Swedish pietism is what my church was at the time, and we didn't do a ton of embodied awareness in worship. And this was a really significant, like you're walking uphill and it's hard, and you're walking in community with people and you're carrying this heavy thing sometimes. And so that really grounded that service in our bodies in a really cool way, and in creation, because we were doing it outside and cold. And so when you arrive at whatever the church was that was hosting it, you get inside, you get a little bit warmer, and then you proceed through the rest of the Good Friday readings and such. It was just a really memorable, impactful service.
It's similar to what I was saying about Stations of the Cross through senses.
Yeah.
Anything that embodies anything, but like scripture stories, I think really helps insert you into the story in ways that just straight up reading it or listening to someone else read it
Right.
doesn't necessarily do for us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it changes the perspective to not a fully lived one, but a partially lived one.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's well, never mind. Yes, it's a good way to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And for both of those to have like that embodied engagement of a story in community in some way too. Like it's not just, I mean, Stations of the Cross is a little bit different because you do go through the stations on your own or like just with your family. But even that, like, you know that these stations are here for everyone and that there are people going through all of them. So you hold these stories in your bodies together, which is just so cool. Mm-hmm. Like we don't get to do that very often.
So the last church I was at actually did share Monday, Thursday, and Good Friday services. We would switch off who hosted what, and the choirs would combine. Yeah. So it was with one other church at a neighboring town. But similar reason, I thought that was really cool because it was a good reminder that, hey, there are other worshiping bodies engaging these practices on this day, and we get to be part of a bigger family, or be aware that there isn't, like, the body of Christ isn't just limited to the doors of our sanctuary.
Right. Yeah.
Other people exist, and we all get to worship together in ways that we maybe wouldn't otherwise. I love Good Friday. It's so depressing.
Same.
What was the atmosphere like? Because I was putting myself in that, if I'm carrying this heavy cross, that would be, I think, super emotional. And I was just trying to imagine, thinking about group walking things I've done and kind of the camaraderie and the conversation. Was this like that, or was this somber, or yeah?
I think there was so because we hadn't jumped into, we saved the observance of the story until the service after. We weren't necessarily fully in the mood of the story yet. And because we were praying at each other's churches, it was kind of like this lifting up each other's prayer and supporting each other, etc. So, and maybe it could have just been my age at the time, and the couple I was young at the time that I was doing this, and the couple times that I got to carry the cross was always like I did it for a couple blocks, and that's about as much as I could take. Yeah. So I remembered it being like a kind of exciting, kind of rallying around sort of mood. But I also remember, depending on who is carrying it and what, we were a small community, so we kind of all knew much of what each other was going through. So when someone would kind of step in and pick up the cross, that would carry some significant. You'd come to that moment knowing what they're going through in the rest of their life. So if they were going through a significant struggle, it would feel really different from when. The times when 4 of the youth group kids took a shift with it, and then the kind of whole crew rallies around them. It just had a different feel.
Sure, yeah.
But yeah.
Wow.
That reminded me. I think I have a picture on my phone of the pastors. Our church, we had this. It was just ridiculous, almost comically large of a cross, but also it was like the looming large.
Sure.
Maybe more to scale ish, not truly, but big. Of what maybe the size it probably would have actually been to have somebody up there. And there, for some reason, I think it didn't fit through the doorways or the hallway, or it couldn't comfortably go up the stairs of where it was to where it needed to go. Like, that's how big this thing was. So they had to go outside the building and bring it around. And I have a photo of them carrying like both one end. And I took it thinking like, oh, it's like poetic that the pastors, but they're like laughing and making weird faces. And it changes the vibe of like,
it does, yeah.
We're putting, in general, it's weird that we as Christians have crosses up anyways, because it'd be like an electrocution chair being on a necklace or up for all to see. Like somebody died, was horrifically executed in this way, and we're celebrating its existence. And it like just made it even more comedically, I don't know, weird.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absurd a little bit.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, Good Friday's fun. It's one of the few times a year in church that I inevitably always just cry. I just assume I'm going to. I don't force myself to, but it happens, and I let it happen, and that is a big deal. I don't leave the sanctuary when it happens. Yeah, it's a choice to be vulnerable, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. Phil, what's your story?
Yeah, I was going to tell a specific story that encompasses that Holy Saturday, sort of. So when I was just out of college, we went back to my hometown up in the UP, and I got pulled in to be doing interim youth minister stuff because the youth pastor moved on to take another job, and it was in between time, and Phil's done some ministry stuff, so here you go, have the youth group, which was, I loved these kiddos. It was actually when my sister was still there, so that's really fun.
Oh, that is fun.
And one of the years while I was there, 30-hour famine became a thing. I wish I could remember off the top of my head which group it was raising funds for, but one of the organizations that provides food to folks that need it around the world. And it's 30-hour famine is a bit like a walk, run, whatever, a-thon, where you for however long you're going to be doing the thing for, you get people to donate or to pledge. Mm-hmm. And so it's we're gonna fast for 30 hours.
Sorry.
And so it was, and then you donate the funds to this cool cause. Mm-hmm. And I thought it'd be neat if folks were willing, and they ended up being willing, if we set it up to be something that happened from like the end of the day, Good Friday, like near midnight, to Easter Sunday morning. And there's a plan for a sunrise breakfast at the church. And so our last thing that we ate was the pastor came and served us communion. Mm-hmm. And that was the last food that we took on Good Friday night.
And you didn't eat until Sunday morning?
And we didn't eat. People drank water.
Well, you would perish if you didn't, I would think. That would be so dangerous. To drink no water?
Just for a day, then.
30 hours?
That's not that long.
Well, because 30
I
hours,
would perish.
I would perish.
Right. It's not great, right? And there are water fasts and stuff.
Well, I'm thinking of who couldn't like as a breastfeeding mom, there'd be no way.
Well, and this was definitely for youth group, is what this was.
Okay, a child who has a kidney problem.
Right. Yes, I agree.
Okay.
So sure.
Sorry.
Except for everyone's perfectly healthy, and
I have
we're all
opinions
privileged,
about
and
this.
we have no disabilities, and it's great.
Right.
I've got some stuff on that too, and I also have some curiosity now. So this is 22-year-old Phil, and I'm curious about the theology. It's hard to look back and know what you thought and believed about things, right? I thought there was some beauty in the fasting during this waiting period, the time between death and resurrection. And then it feels like maybe it's this time of prayer and hope, not quite, lostness, seekingness, like what now?
It's kind of like the 40 days of Lent.
Yeah.
But
like
super
smaller
condensed.
amount of time.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, as I look back, what I mostly remember about this event was we had, what would it have been? Maybe a GameCube at the time hooked to the TV, and lots of board games. And it was very much like a youth group lock-in, except for there was no food. Right? And so, I mean,
probably less hyper.
Maybe. Or getting silly.
Right.
From the
lack of blood sugar.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we did have things people could have if they wanted, like there were juice boxes and whatever if people decided to do that. But everybody was, we're gonna be hardcore. And then things that happened. So we were also on duty to then prepare the breakfast.
Oh, man.
Yeah. So like eggs and sausage and whatever else, and then serve the breakfast because that was part of the whole fundraiser thing too, I think. And then, these high schoolers are gorging themselves on sausage and eggs and whatever else we had. And several of them got really sick because it's rich food after not eating all day. And then one of my favorite, I don't know if we can call this a God story, but there was a kiddo who had to go to the hospital the next day.
Oh.
And Maddie, you'll love this. It was appendicitis. And what was amazing about that was she hadn't eaten the day before, which isn't usually the case when you go in to get your appendix removed. Normally you'd ask someone to before any kind of surgical thing to not eat the day before.
Never mind.
Wow.
That's
And so she had
eaten a ton of food.
No,
Not even that Sunday morning?
No, she didn't feel good.
Yeah.
But she'd fasted the day before. And so it was
Okay.
oh, great. You're all
Set for
You're good to
surgery.
go.
cleaned out and good to go.
Yeah.
And so it was
Wow.
and that's why we did this. I don't know. But
God knew her appendix.
but anyway, yeah, just the I've thought about that a bit, and yeah, I don't know that I would choose the 30-hour famine as something to impose on a youth group now, but fasting is an interesting thing to engage well together.
I think like most things we Christians do, the sentiment is great, or the what it's wanting to be is beautiful. There's beautiful communal something in that. I liked what you just said about the theology of death to Easter rising. I think the way we talk about fasting in general is really tricky because it becomes like a diet culture thing. And anytime we're specifically restricting food, I just think that's dangerous. Probably because, and maybe this is like a trigger warning thing with disordered eating, but I struggle and have struggled with disordered eating. And so that's going to be a great weekend for somebody who is already perhaps starving themselves. Right. And then that morning, Sunday, is going to be a whole trigger fest for that person. Or someone that has a binge eating disorder. Mm-hmm. Also, there's a privilege in that of we are raising money for people who cannot afford to eat, knowing that we're going to get to gorge ourselves on Sunday and also having fun while we don't eat.
Yeah, there's all kinds of interesting, weird privilege-y.
Yeah, which I think on one hand, you could have a great conversation about the privilege we carry that we are participating in not eating as a choice in order to raise money for people who do not have a choice. A great conversation could be had there. I think the great conversation could be had without starving ourselves.
Well, yeah, and I think there's so much more, at least in my body, I think in our culture, awareness around some of the problematic pieces that brings up, some of the, the privileges, but also, the awareness of, I was talking to a kiddo recently who was sharing about a sermon given that was about fasting and how triggering that was for a bunch of, it's we can pray to God to give us the strength to resist the temptation of food. And here's this group of kids who are no, actually we need to pray to God for the will to
eat, the
strength to choose to nourish our bodies to eat. Yeah. So, there's definitely still that missing awareness here and there. Well, probably more than here and there. Anyway, yeah, so this is the thing I've been sitting with the last few years about remembering that and feeling a little odd about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of our conversation. I forget which one, and it's probably connected to multiple ones, but we talked a couple episodes back around how churches cultivate these places for you to do really vulnerable things, but often don't don't do the work beforehand to be sure both that you're earning it and that you're making it hospitable to someone who might need a different way to engage the ritual.
Mm-hmm. And to be clear, no space, including the church, can be 100% inclusive, 100% trigger free for everybody's everything.
Yeah.
Food, however, feels like a very large trigger for the masses. Like there's certain triggers that are just automatic trigger warnings to give, or automatic things that we try to be a little bit more careful about. And I think food is kind of one of those things, or maybe it's becoming increasingly more one of those things.
Yeah.
I suspect it's always been, but we're talking about
Right.
it.
Right.
And I think violence is another really huge one. And Good Friday is one of those. So
Yes.
that you bring that up, Jackson, riding on the coattails of that discussion, we had a Good Friday service this week, and I had a conversation with someone who was really upset. They weren't aware of what the service was going to be, and it was a really intense reading and sort of performance of the story, and there weren't really trigger warnings. And what I gleaned from that was exactly what we just talked about, and that there wasn't a space for people to leave. Like, let's say we said, yeah, and we're going to tell the story, and if it becomes emotional, you're welcome to, get up and whatever.
Which is such a vulnerable choice to have to
like
make
you're
anyways.
going to, right? Or we need to create a moment where it's the past that we're gonna peace and walk around, and this would be a great time for you to
Get out.
slip out if you want to or whatever. Or what are we gonna provide afterward for folks? And we
Right.
had nothing. It was now go, have a cup of coffee and a cookie.
Or
And,
leave in silence and don't speak to anyone about what just happened to you.
Yeah. So anyway, I just, it was really interesting, and I don't know if any of you had a churchy experience this year like that, but like right after we had that conversation, the reality, the poignancy of that need is there. It's just there. So I'd love to hear more from you all about ways that.
Thanks for sharing, Phil.
Yeah.
It's hard to reflect back on things that we were a part of and also led and made choices about that we feel conflicted about later. There's lots of choices I've made that I feel conflicted
But I think
about.
that's super important.
Oh,
and to
yes.
invite feedback, and to especially from the people that we're affecting, and to say, how do we create a space where you can encounter this stuff and do it not necessarily comfortably, but safely.
Right.
Yeah.
On that note, Hannah,
I was just going to say, we're starting to
get
get
a lot of wormholes.
Yeah, it's true. Holy Week will do that.
Holy Week. It's wormholy.
Yes.
It's
Okay.
There's also a missed opportunity for getting down rabbit holes.
Yes.
That's what I meant to say.
Yes.
And that's why I went wormhole off to the side. I whispered. Wormhole?
Right.
Yep. Okay, so the brief story I will share is about Easter, but it is about a very particular Easter. Easter in 2020. It was our COVID Easter. And at that point, I just looked this up. I think Easter happened on April 12th in 2020. And
it's the 1 month mark or so, isn't it?
not even our last, of like the official declaration of COVID being a pandemic, I think, yes.
Okay.
But it was still just a couple days after that Michigan, where we are currently, declared like a lockdown. And our final day together in the seminary that I worked at, and that, we have already talked about this on the podcast, the seminary that the four of us are connected to. Jackson was a student at that time. I was working at the seminary at that time.
I was also a student, but
That's
virtually.
true. Yes, you were a virtual
I
student
was
at
already
that
on
time.
lockdown.
Ugh, gosh. But like that's literally just a month after our last day together for the in-residence folks. And a couple people reached out to me and said, hey, we like this, we're just so longing for community, both in the seminary, and we're disconnected from our worshiping communities. And the seminary has this daily chapel service rhythm that it goes through. So like we're just, as everyone experienced during that time, just missing so many things. And going through Easter, fasting from that celebration, this forced fast, was just so painful. So a couple of folks and I figured out a way to do a sort of distanced celebration of Easter, where no one had to interact with other people, but there was a thing that represented the rest of the community that you could come and interact with. So it was a rainy day, so I set up this table out on me and Jackson's tiny little front porch. And it like, our front porch is really small. So there's like literally just room for this table and someone to step up onto the porch and stand in front of the table. We could not get out of our door. There's like a little window that like you could see people coming up to the table. But on this table, I had different, again, tangible things that people could interact with. And I wrote a message to the people who live in it's the seminary housing. It's not exactly an apartment complex. I think they're townhouses technically. But I sent a message to the people who live in the townhouses saying, here, we're setting up this thing to come and engage. If you can bring things to tangibly engage, or there's a way to go through these steps without touching anything if you don't want to touch things. But we had these different elements on the table. One was a bowl of water. You could bring a cup and pour a little bit of water into the bowl and remember your baptism. There was a little cross on the table. I invited people to bring a piece of fabric to lay on the cross. And a Bible open to a particular passage that I invited people to read. A candle with tiny little tea lights that people could come and light tea lights from the Christ candle that I had laying out on the table. And then finally, me and the friend who helped me set this up, we got tiny little bottles of wine and tiny little Kool-Aid things. Because
so you had.
We had, yes. Okay, so here's where we're getting back to communion,
right, full circle.
during that time where the entire church was like, how do we do communion if we can't be
and suddenly
together?
That was acceptable.
Yep. And at that point, there were still tons of people all over social medias being like, no, I shouldn't do it. We should fast until we can physically be together again, which like lots of valid things.
For sure.
But we decided to do it anyway. So little Kool-Aid bottles, because there's lots of kids in our little housing complex here. And then we have lots of gluten-free, dairy-free folks. So we had these little, like, they weren't even like crackers or bread or anything. They were like, we decided everything had to be individually packaged. So they were basically like little gluten-free cake bars. So there's like nothing resembling communion at all, but like the
elements were there.
Yeah, the elements were there. And it just like to have our windows open and watch people come and engage this thing from afar, knowing that I cannot open the door to like even talk to them because I would be within 6 feet of them, but like could crack one of the windows that's like several feet away in our house and like yell at them through that window. It's like the first time I had seen many of those people in weeks. Right. So like even though it was a shadow of what is typical for an Easter Sunday, we had been fasting from each other, from community, from these tangible pieces that are a regular part of worship at Western Seminary, that like getting to interact with those pieces and getting to see people through a window felt like a feast, even though it was more like manna. It was this is like so much pain and so much beauty at the same time.
Yeah, it's kind of like it's the glimmers of what life still is or still was in the midst of lockdown. Like there's still life out there. There's still an existence of normalcy.
Yep.
It almost kind of reminds me of like when birds first start to come back from winter and you can hear them, but maybe you don't see them yet because they're hiding away in their homes. And there's not a ton of them. It's kind of like that. People are trickling back together in this, through a window way, which is beautiful.
Strong already, not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is what we kind of celebrate on Easter. It's
Absolutely.
it's the already not yet of the kingdom coming. Christ has died, Christ has risen, Christ will come again. And we're not in that come again. It's will.
Yeah.
Christ has died, Christ is risen, I guess is the more proper way to say it.
Yeah.
That's lovely.
Yeah.
You saying all the communion debates had valid points made me want to add just quickly to what I said earlier. To be clear, whatever beautiful, enriching theological conversation my session had to deny me bread and juice, as frustrating as that was, and as like kind of I basically called it ridiculous. I did call it ridiculous. No, I am now, I guess. I also, though I wasn't there, believe that conversation obviously had value, and whatever choice they made was for a reason that they felt very strongly about, and I'm sure it was valid to them in that room, and I affirm their ability to have those conversations and make decisions. So sorry.
You know what's really beautiful in that is
Jackson's gonna edit that and put it at the beginning.
Almost certainly.
what's really beautiful though is you not assuming that they've left the conversation, right? That even someone who might have been stirred up or hurt by that was still here with us.
Well,
There's
I
something
was stirred up
beautiful
and hurt
communal about that.
by the choice.
Friends, we are so grateful that you have been on this
Journey.
whatever sort of journey
Why did
this
I
has
say
been
that?
through Holy Week.
Holy week, Batman.
And we love for you to also share some of your experiences of different days, traditions of Holy Week, or even just tell us what your Holy Week was like this year. We're a couple years post-COVID or post the beginning of COVID, and things are very different now. So just like we would love to hear some of your stories too.
And wrapping things up, you'll notice that we didn't mention the Easter Bunny for legit and valid reasons, because that's a garbage tradition. But maybe
Late shots fired.
but maybe it's meaningful to you, and that's valid. And so if you haven't yet, check this out over on Patreon. We're going to have a conversation and shoot some shots, fire some, oh Lord, have mercy upon my soul, about the Easter Bunny. That's where that conversation is going to take place beyond semi-closed doors.
Right.
So if you'd like to join us, check us out over on Patreon. Jackson, what's the actual?
Yeah. Patreon.com/Wayfolk Arts. Wayfolk Arts. Check us out over there, both for that conversation and all of the after show shenanigans that we get into over there.
They're really delightful.
They're pretty delightful.
You should go listen.
Definitely check it out. At the lowest tier of patronship, you get access to that, to the patron only posts, all sorts of good stuff. There's a lot of other great tiers. You get patron specific art, all sorts of fun stuff over there.
And believe it or not, we are even more unhinged.
Can I name something else? We've talked about there being a Discord that our Patreon sponsors are welcome on, and Patreon sponsors get a different role in it. And we're just starting to build this community. But actually, I would like to see if we can put a link below this to be an invite to our Discord server. So if you'd love to jump in and have some conversations with one another and with us about liturgy, about these kinds of topics that we bring up, look below on whichever platform you're on, and we'll see if we can put a...
just in the description of the episode.
In the description of the episode that has a link to jump onto our Discord. And if you want to learn how to do that, good luck.
Right.
Wow.
No, there's great ways that
Google.
you could message us and we can get you set up with an instruction guide to get set up on Discord.
Phil will get
Please
you
message
set up.
me.
Don't message Maddie because Maddie still doesn't know.
Yeah, definitely. If you're wanting to kind of continue the conversation with us, find us on all the social medias at Wayfolk Arts on all of those social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter especially. Discord is in the description down below. And of course, if you want to have the conversation over on Patreon, we'll be cultivating that conversation over there as well.
Have a happy Eastertide. Whether that has to do with the moon or not, couldn't tell you. Circling back to the beginning.
Yep.
But may you reflect.
May your tides come in
Well.
and go out.
Right.
Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Not the bunny though.
See you in a half moon.
What?
What does that mean?
Thank you for tuning in to this conversation on Liturgical Shenanigans. If you enjoyed this conversation, please share it around to other people who you think might enjoy it as well. We are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all the places. You can find us at the username Wayfolk Arts. And if you're looking for a way to get involved with the show a little bit more, as we said in the episode, head on over to patreon.com/wayfolkarts, where you get to hear more of the show and get access to a bunch of other patron-only posts and things like that. Thank you all for tuning in. It was a delight to spend some time with you. We'll see you in 2 weeks.